In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that even the mightiest empires fear to acknowledge. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can shatter the foundations of everything we believe about ourselves. What happens when a creature of legend, desperate and broken, places her most precious treasure into the hands of species the galaxy considers nothing more than barbaric newcomers? What happens when that simple gesture of trust becomes the spark that ignites a revolution across 1,000 worlds? This is not a story about conquest or technology. This is not a tale of superior firepower or advanced civilizations. This is the story of Dr. Marcus Chun, a simple human xenobiologist, and the moment he proved that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in what we can destroy, but in what we choose to save. Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about heroes, monsters, and the thin line that separates civilization from chaos. Because when the mother dragon's tears fell that day, they didn't just save one small life. They changed the destiny of every living soul in the galaxy. The universe is about to learn what humanity truly means. Dr. Marcus Chun had seen many strange things during his 3-year station on Kepler Station, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him in the early morning hours of his shift. The massive viewing port of the medical bay showed the emptiness of space, dotted with the usual traffic of merchant vessels and patrol ships. But there, silhouetted against the pale light of the twin suns, was something that made his coffee cup slip from his fingers. A dragon. A real, living dragon floating in the vacuum of space. Marcus rubbed his eyes, certain he was hallucinating from too many late nights studying alien parasites. But when he looked again, the creature was still there. It was massive, easily 200 meters from snout to tail, with scales that seemed to shimmer between deep purple and silver. But what caught his attention wasn't its size or beauty, it was the way it moved. The great beast wasn't flying with the graceful power he'd expect from such a magnificent creature. Instead, it drifted weakly, its movements desperate and erratic. "Computer, magnify Section 7 Alpha," Marcus commanded, his voice barely a whisper. The image zoomed in, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The dragon wasn't alone. Clutched carefully in its massive claws was something small, a baby, no bigger than Marcus himself. The little creature appeared to be unconscious, its tiny scales dull and lifeless. But what nearly brought tears to Marcus's eyes was the expression on the mother's face. Even across the vast distance, and through the alien features, he could see the desperate love of a parent fighting to save her child. Marcus had spent years studying the Draconian Empire, the oldest and most powerful civilization known to the galactic community. They were a proud species, ancient beyond measure, with technology that seemed like magic to most other races. The dragons viewed themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, and their empire stretched across thousands of star systems. They tolerated other species, but barely, considering most of them to be little more than amusing primitives. Humans were particularly low on their list of respected species. Earth had only made contact with the galactic community 50 years ago, and humans were still seen as crude newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. The dragons had made it clear that humanity existed in their galaxy only because they allowed it. So why was one of these magnificent, prideful creatures here, at a human station, clearly in distress? Marcus activated his communicator. "Bridge, this is Dr. Chun in Medical Bay 3. We have an unusual situation developing." The voice of Commander Sarah Walsh crackled through the speaker. "What kind of situation, Doctor?" "There's a draconian female outside the station. She appears to be carrying a juvenile, and both seem to be in medical distress." A long pause followed. Marcus could imagine the confusion on the bridge. First contact protocols with dragons were strict and rarely invoked. The Draconians typically handled their own affairs without involving other species. "Are you certain it's a distress situation, Doctor?" Commander Walsh asked finally. Marcus watched as the great dragon slowly approached the station, her massive eyes scanning the structure. She moved with the careful determination of someone who had exhausted all other options. "I'm certain, Commander. She's looking for help." Within minutes, the station's senior staff had gathered in the observation deck. Commander Walsh stood beside Marcus, her experienced eyes studying the approaching dragon. Chief Engineer Rodriguez muttered prayers in Spanish while Security Chief Thompson checked and rechecked his weapon, though they all knew it would be useless against a creature of such power. "Sir," Communications Officer Kim spoke up from her station, "I'm receiving a transmission. It's an old draconian formal speech. Very archaic. Can you translate it?" Commander Walsh asked. Officer Kim's fingers flew over her console. "It's difficult. The grammar structure is ancient. But I think she's requesting sanctuary. Medical sanctuary for her offspring." The group fell silent. Medical sanctuary was an ancient galactic law, one that predated most current civilizations. It stated that any being seeking medical aid for themselves or their young could not be turned away, regardless of politics or species conflicts. It was a law that even the proud dragons respected. "Dr. Chun," Commander Walsh turned to him. "What's your assessment?" Marcus studied the dragon through the viewing port. The mother had positioned herself near the station's main docking bay, but she wasn't attempting to force entry. Instead, she waited, her great head bowed in what could only be described as supplication. The baby in her claws remained motionless. "The juvenile appears to be in critical condition," Marcus said carefully. "Without proper examination, I can't be sure, but the signs suggest severe illness or poisoning. The mother's body language indicates exhaustion and desperation. She's traveled a long way to get here." "Why here, though?" Thompson asked. "Why not go to a dragon medical facility? They have technology far beyond ours." Marcus had been wondering the same thing. As he watched the mother dragon, a terrible possibility occurred to him. "Maybe she can't," he said quietly. "Maybe whatever's wrong with her child is something the dragons either can't treat or won't treat." The implications of that statement hung in the air like a dark cloud. If the mighty draconian empire couldn't or wouldn't help one of their own young, what hope did a small human medical facility have? Commander Walsh made her decision with the quick confidence that had earned her command of the station. "Dr. Chun, prepare Medical Bay 1 for emergency treatment." Kim sent a response accepting sanctuary and requesting permission to bring them aboard. "Commander," Thompson protested, "with all due respect, we have no idea what we're dealing with here. This could be some kind of trap. A mother doesn't use her dying child as bait for a trap." "Chief," Walsh replied firmly, "and even if this is somehow a deception, medical sanctuary laws protect us as much as them. They can't attack us while under sanctuary." Marcus hurried to prepare the medical bay, while Officer Kim transmitted their acceptance. The response came quickly, a single word in ancient Draconian that translated roughly to gratitude beyond measure. The docking process took nearly an hour. The mother dragon was far too large to fit inside the station, so they had to extend one of the emergency atmospheric tubes to create a seal connection. Marcus watched through the medical bay cameras as the great creature carefully maneuvered her child into the tube, her movements gentle despite her obvious exhaustion. When the airlock finally cycled open, Marcus got his first close look at a dragon youngling. The baby was about the size of a human, with scales that should have been a brilliant emerald, but were now faded to a sickly gray-green. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and its temperature readings were dangerously low. Behind the youngling came the mother's massive head, barely fitting through the enlarged airlock. Her eyes, each larger than Marcus's entire body, fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel as if his soul was being examined. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder, but the universal translator rendered her words clearly. "Human healer," she said, her ancient voice carrying centuries of dignity despite her obvious distress. "I am Thar of the Crimson Wing clan. This is my son, Zethkaler. He is dying, and I have nowhere else to turn." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Here was a member of the galaxy's most powerful species, humbling herself before a human she had probably never paid attention to before. The trust she was showing was unprecedented in galactic history. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chun," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll do everything I can to help your son." Thyranar's great eyes glistened with what could only be tears. "The healers of my people say he cannot be saved. They say the poison runs too deep, that it would be merciful to let him pass. But I cannot accept this. I have heard whispers that human healers sometimes see solutions where others see only endings." Marcus began his examination of young Zethkaler, running every scan he could think of. The readings were confusing and contradictory. The youngling's cellular structure was breaking down, but not in any pattern Marcus recognized. It was as if something was systematically destroying the child's life force. "How long has he been like this?" Marcus asked as he worked. 47 rotations, Tharinar replied. It began suddenly. He was playing with his clutch siblings, healthy and strong. Then he collapsed, and since that moment, he has grown weaker each day. Marcus paused in his scanning. Clutch siblings? How many others were there? Tharinar's massive head lowered. 7. All dead within 10 rotations. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. An entire clutch of dragon younglings dead from the same mysterious condition. No wonder the dragon healers had given up hope. "Tell me about where this happened," Marcus said, his scientific mind racing. What was different about that day? Tharinar's eyes closed, as if the memory was painful. "We were visiting the Forbidden Zones, the old territories where our ancestors first settled. The younglings were curious about the ancient ruins there. I should never have allowed them to explore, but they seemed so fascinated by the history of our people." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The Forbidden Zones were legendary among xenobiologists. Ancient areas of space that even the dragons avoided, supposedly because of dangerous radiation or environmental hazards. But what if there was more to it? "Tharinar," Marcus said carefully, "I need to ask you something that might be difficult. Did any of your people ever experiment with biological weapons? Particularly ones designed to target dragon physiology?" The great dragon's eyes snapped open, blazing with sudden fury. "How dare you suggest?" She stopped abruptly, her expression changing from anger to something far more complex. You think this might be artificial? I think your son's condition is too specific, too targeted to be natural," Marcus replied honestly. "Something is systematically attacking his genetic structure in a way that suggests deliberate design." Tharinar was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There are stories, old stories of the time of madness, when our people were not as unified as they are now. Stories of weapons so terrible that those who created them were exiled from all dragon society forever." Marcus felt pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to form in his mind. And these exiled ones, where did they go? "To the Forbidden Zones," Tharinar said, her voice heavy with the weight of ancient shame, "where they were left to die for their crimes against dragonkind." Marcus stared at the readings on his scanner, his mind racing. If his suspicions were correct, young Zethkaler wasn't just sick. He was the victim of an ancient weapon, possibly one designed by dragons themselves in some long-forgotten civil war. And if that was true, then the key to saving him might lie not in advanced dragon medicine, but in understanding the twisted science of outcasts who had been dead for centuries. As if reading his thoughts, Tharinar spoke again. "Dr. Chun, I must tell you something else. The healers of my people, they did not simply say my son could not be saved. They said he should not be saved. They fear that if word spreads of this sickness, it could cause panic among our people. They have forbidden me from seeking outside help." Marcus looked up from his instruments to meet the great dragon's eyes. "But you came anyway." "I came anyway," Tharinar confirmed, "because I am his mother, and a mother's love knows no boundaries of law or custom. Even if it means I can never return to my people, even if it means I'm branded a traitor to my own kind." In that moment, Marcus understood the true courage of the being before him. Tharinar had not just traveled across space seeking help for her child. She had abandoned everything she had ever known, defied her entire civilization, and made herself an exile for the slim chance that a human doctor might succeed where dragon science had failed. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but Marcus felt something else growing inside him as well: determination. This mother had shown more trust in humanity than any dragon in recorded history. She had placed her most precious possession into human hands, betting everything on the compassion and skill of a species her people barely acknowledged. Marcus wasn't going to let her down. As he began to formulate a treatment plan, Marcus realized that this moment would change everything. Not just for Tharinar and her son, but for the relationship between humans and dragons, and possibly for the entire galaxy. Because sometimes it takes an act of desperate love to show the universe what true strength really means. The mother dragon's tears had fallen in the vastness of space, carrying with them the hopes and fears of a parent's heart. Now it was time to see if human hands could catch those tears and transform them into something miraculous. The real test was just beginning. Marcus spent the next 18 hours diving deeper into the mystery than any human had ever gone before. While young Zethkaler lay in the medical bay's intensive care unit, his life signs slowly but steadily declining, Marcus worked with a desperation that bordered on obsession. Thyra remained by her son's side, her massive form somehow managing to fit into the enlarged medical bay, her ancient eyes never leaving the small figure on the treatment table. The breakthrough came when Marcus decided to stop thinking like a human doctor and start thinking like a dragon scientist from thousands of years ago. He had requested access to the station's xenoarchaeological database, searching for any references to dragon biological weapons or ancient conflicts. Computer cross-referenced dragon genetic markers with known biological warfare agents from the pre-Unity period. Marcus commanded for the 20th time, adjusting his search parameters. This time, the computer's response made him freeze. Match found. Archived research from the University of Proxima regarding excavations on Draken Prime. Warning: classified material requires security clearance level 7 or higher. Marcus didn't have level 7 clearance, but Commander Walsh did. Within minutes, she had authorized access to the restricted files, and what Marcus found there made his blood run cold. The documents detailed the discovery of a research facility on Draken Prime, the dragon's ancient homeworld, buried deep beneath layers of volcanic ash. The facility was older than most galactic civilizations, dating back to what dragon histories call the Time of Madness. Inside, xenoarchaeologists had found evidence of biological weapons development on a scale that dwarfed anything modern science could conceive. But it was the specific details that made Marcus's hands tremble as he read. The ancient dragon scientists hadn't just created weapons to kill their enemies. They had created weapons designed to target specific genetic lineages, to eliminate entire family lines while leaving others untouched. And, according to the research, some of these weapons had been designed with delayed activation, lying dormant for millennia before triggering when exposed to specific environmental conditions. Marcus called up the genetic analysis of Zethkaler and compared it to the genetic markers mentioned in the archaeological report. The match was almost perfect. The youngling was a descendant of one of the ancient royal lines that had been specifically targeted during the Civil War. Thyra, Marcus called softly. The great dragon lifted her massive head, hope and fear warring in her ancient eyes. "I believe I know what's wrong with your son," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "But first, I need to know something about your family line. Are you descended from royalty? Ancient royalty, from before the unification of your people?" Thyra's eyes widened with surprise. "How could you possibly ask? My bloodline traces back to the Crystal Throne dynasty, the rulers of the Outer Spiral before the Great Joining. But that was over 10,000 years ago. How is that relevant to my son's condition?" Marcus showed her the research data, explaining as simply as he could about genetic weapons and delayed activation triggers. As he spoke, he watched the emotions play across Thyra's alien features: shock, anger, and then a terrible understanding. "You're saying that my people, my own ancestors, created a weapon that would kill their own descendants?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. "Not your ancestors directly," Marcus said gently. "The rebels, the ones who were exiled to the Forbidden Zones. They created weapons designed to target the royal bloodlines they blamed for the Civil War. And somehow, exposure to the ruins in those zones activated a weapon that had been dormant in your son's genetic code for 10 millennia. Thyra was silent for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of ancient sorrow. "This explains why the healers said he should not be saved. If this knowledge became public, it would shatter our people's understanding of their own history. The official records speak of the exiled ones as criminals and madmen. But if they were capable of creating weapons of such sophistication, it would suggest they weren't the primitive rebels your histories claim they were," Marcus finished. "It would raise questions about why they rebelled, and whether they might have had legitimate grievances." Marcus could see the implications weighing on Thyra's mind. Dragon society was built on the foundation of their ancient noble bloodlines and the righteousness of their ancestors. Learning that those same bloodlines might have been responsible for driving brilliant scientists to create such terrible weapons would shake the very foundations of their civilization. "But there's hope," Marcus continued quickly. "The archaeological report mentions finding partial formulas for countermeasures. The ancient scientists didn't just create weapons. They also created treatments, possibly for their own protection. If I can decode these formulas and adapt them for modern use. Thyra straightened, her massive form radiating sudden determination. What do you need? Marcus pulled up a list of the chemical compounds mentioned in the ancient formulas. Most of them were recognizable, but several were completely unknown to human science. I need samples of these compounds. Some of them might still exist in dragon medical databases, but others— He hesitated, knowing what he was about to ask. Others would only be found in the forbidden zones, Thyra said, understanding immediately. The ruins where your son was infected might contain not just the weapons, but also the tools to fight them, Marcus explained. But I can't ask you to go back there. The risk would be enormous. Thyra looked at her son, unconscious on the treatment table, his breathing growing shallower by the hour. Dr. Chun, you have given me something my own people could not hope. If there is even the smallest chance that returning to those cursed ruins might save my son, then I will face whatever dangers await there. Marcus felt a chill of excitement and terror. What they were contemplating was beyond dangerous. It was potentially catastrophic. If they were wrong about the countermeasures, they might trigger more ancient weapons. If they were caught by dragon authorities, Thyra would face execution for violating the prohibition on entering the forbidden zones. And if word of their mission spread, it could destabilize the entire galactic order. There's something else, Marcus said reluctantly. Even if we find the countermeasures, adapting them for use will require equipment and expertise beyond what this station can provide. We'll need help from the best xenobiologists and geneticists in human space. Then, we will get that help, Thyra said simply. Marcus shook his head. You don't understand. What I'm talking about would require revealing the truth about the ancient weapons to other humans. And once that knowledge exists, it can't be contained. Your people will see it as a threat to their security. Thyra considered this carefully. Dr. Chun, my people have already considered my son a threat to their security. They were willing to let him die rather than risk the truth being discovered. I have already chosen his life over their secrets. Over the next several hours, Marcus and Thyra worked together to plan their desperate mission. Marcus contacted Dr. Elena Vasquez, his former mentor at the Proxima Research Institute, explaining the situation in carefully coded language. Elena was one of the finest genetic researchers in human space, and her laboratory had the advanced equipment they would need. Meanwhile, Thyra used her own connections to gather intelligence about the forbidden zones. Despite the prohibition against entering those areas, she had contacts among the Dragon military who could provide navigation data and environmental information. The area they needed to explore was on the edge of a dead solar system, where the ancient rebels had established their final stronghold before their civilization collapsed. As they prepared for departure, Commander Walsh pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. Doctor, do you understand what you're getting into? She asked seriously. If this goes wrong, it won't just be your career on the line. It could trigger a diplomatic incident that destabilizes human-dragon relations for generations. Marcus looked through the medical bay viewport at Thyra, who was gently stroking her son's scales with one massive claw, singing what could only be a dragon lullaby in her ancient language. Commander, 3 days ago, the dragon saw us as barely civilized newcomers who were tolerated only because we weren't worth the effort to remove, Marcus replied. Today, one of their greatest nobles has entrusted her child's life to human medicine and human compassion. If we succeed, we don't just save one young dragon. We prove to the galaxy that humanity deserves to be treated as equals. Commander Walsh nodded slowly. And if you fail? If we fail, at least we fail while trying to save an innocent life, Marcus said. That's how to count for something. As Kepler Station's emergency medical transport prepared for departure, Marcus made one final check on Zeth Kaler's condition. The youngling's life signs were critically weak, but still stable. They had perhaps 48 hours before the genetic weapon completed its work. Thyra had managed to compress her massive form into the transport's cargo bay, a feat that spoke to both her desperation and her determination. As the ship's engines powered up, she spoke to Marcus through the intercom. Dr. Chun, I want you to know that regardless of what happens, you have already given me more than I dared hope for. You have shown me that honor and compassion exist beyond the boundaries of species. Whatever the outcome, I will carry this knowledge with me always. Marcus strapped himself into the pilot's seat, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Thyra Your trust in me, in humanity, has changed everything. We're not just trying to save your son anymore. We're trying to save the idea that different species can work together, can trust each other, can be family to each other." As the transport jumped to hyperspace, heading for the most dangerous region of space known to galactic civilization, Marcus realized that they were crossing more than just physical distance. They were crossing the boundaries of what had ever been attempted between their species. They were venturing into uncharted territory, not just in space, but in the realm of interspecies cooperation. Behind them, Zeth Kaler slept in his medical pod, unaware that his life had become the focal point of a mission that would either herald a new age of cooperation between humans and dragons, or become a cautionary tale told for generations about the dangers of reaching too far. The forbidden zones awaited them, holding secrets that could change everything. And in the depths of space, a mother's love continued to drive them forward into the unknown, toward a destiny that none of them could fully comprehend. The ancient weapons slept in their hidden vaults, but soon they would awaken to face something their creators never anticipated: the power of two species united by compassion and determination to protect the innocent. The Forbidden Zones were unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. As their transport dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates Thyranar had provided, he found himself staring at what remained of an entire solar system that had been systematically destroyed. The central star was a dim red dwarf, barely providing enough energy to illuminate the debris field that had once been a collection of thriving worlds. "By the ancient fires," Thar whispered through the intercom, her voice filled with awe and horror. "I had read the historical accounts, but seeing it with my own eyes, the devastation was complete. Where planets should have existed, there were only asteroid fields of pulverized rock and metal. Twisted structures floated in the void, the remnants of space stations and orbital cities that had been reduced to skeletal frameworks by some unimaginable catastrophe." "What happened here?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thyranar was silent for a long moment before answering. "The official histories say that the rebels destroyed themselves in their madness, turning their own weapons upon their strongholds in a final act of spite. But looking at this," she paused, her ancient voice heavy with doubt, "this level of destruction suggests something far more deliberate. This was not the work of madmen destroying themselves. This was the work of people who wanted to ensure that their secrets died with them." Marcus piloted the transport deeper into the debris field, following the navigation data that Thyranar had obtained from her military contacts. Their destination was the largest remaining structure, a massive installation that had somehow survived the catastrophe that had claimed everything else in the system. As they approached, the structure revealed itself to be a research facility of incredible scale. Built into what remained of a shattered moon, it stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The architecture was unmistakably dragon, but older and more elaborate than anything in the modern empire. Spires and towers twisted through the rock like frozen lightning, connected by bridges that defied conventional engineering. "The sanctum of the last truth," Thyranar said, her voice filled with reverence and fear. "I thought it was a legend. You know this place?" Marcus asked as he maneuvered the transport toward what appeared to be a docking bay carved into the moon's surface. "Every dragon child knows the stories," Thyranar replied. "It was said to be the final stronghold of the exiled ones, the place where they retreated when the Empire turned against them. According to legend, they sealed themselves inside with all their knowledge, preferring death to surrender." As the transport settled onto the ancient docking platform, Marcus could see that the facility's environmental systems were still functioning after 10,000 years. Atmospheric readings showed breathable air, though the composition was slightly different from what either humans or modern dragons were used to. "Dr. Chun," Thar said as they prepared to disembark, "before we enter this place, you should know something. The stories say that the exiled ones were not just scientists and warriors. They were visionaries who believed that all sentient species should be equal, that the galaxy should not be ruled by any single race. It was this belief that put them in conflict with the Empire." Marcus paused in his preparations, understanding the implications. "You're saying they weren't the monsters your histories claim they were." "I'm saying that history is written by the victors," Thyranar replied. "And perhaps the Empire had reasons beyond madness for wanting these particular rebels silenced forever." They made their way through the facility's ancient corridors, Thyranar's massive form barely fitting through passages that had been designed for dragons of an earlier age. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they passed, triggered by sensors that had waited millennia for visitors who would never come. The facility was a maze of laboratories, workshops, and data storage chambers. But it was also something else, a monument to knowledge preserved at any cost. Every wall was covered with research data, equations, and diagrams that represented the culmination of the most advanced scientific minds their civilization had ever produced. Marcus felt like an archaeologist exploring the lost library of Alexandria, except that this library contained secrets that could reshape the understanding of life itself. The genetic research alone was centuries ahead of anything modern science had achieved. Here, Felvar called from a chamber they had been searching for hours to find. The Biological Warfare Archive. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with storage units that contained samples, data crystals, and research notes. At the center stood a holographic projection system that activated as they entered, displaying a figure that made Thyranar gasp in recognition. The hologram was of a dragon, but unlike any Marcus had ever seen. This being was elegant and refined, but there was something different about the bone structure, the scale pattern, the way the creature held itself. This was a dragon from a different age, a time when their species was still evolving. Greetings, descendants. The holographic dragon spoke in an ancient dialect that the translation system could barely decipher. If you are viewing this recording, then either our greatest fears have come to pass, or our greatest hopes are about to be realized. The hologram gestured to the surrounding chamber. I am Veltereth the Seeker, last keeper of the Sanctum's knowledge. What you see around you represents not weapons of destruction, but tools of liberation. Yes, we created the genetic targeting systems that the Empire feared so greatly, but not to destroy bloodlines, to free them. Marcus and Thyradar exchanged glances. This was not what either of them had expected to hear. The hologram continued. The royal bloodlines of our people carry within their genetic code artificial constraints, modifications made by our earliest ancestors to ensure absolute loyalty to authority. These constraints limit not just thought and action, but the very potential for growth and change. We discovered this terrible truth and sought to create a way to remove these genetic chains. Thyranar stepped closer to the hologram, her voice filled with shock. That's impossible. The royal bloodlines are pure, unchanged since the dawn of our civilization. The holographic Veltereth smiled sadly. That purity is itself the prison, young noble. Your bloodline, and others like it, were engineered to be incapable of questioning certain fundamental beliefs about dragon superiority and the natural order of the galaxy. The weapons you fear were designed not to kill, but to break those chains, to allow dragons to think freely for the first time in their species' history. Marcus felt the pieces of an enormous puzzle falling into place. But the Empire discovered what you were doing. They discovered that we were trying to corrupt the noble bloodlines. Yes, the hologram confirmed. To them, free-thinking nobility was a greater threat than any external enemy. So they declared us traitors and hunted us to the edge of known space. The hologram moved to a control panel and activated additional displays. But we were not defeated. Before the final siege, we succeeded in creating our liberation protocol. However, we realized that releasing it immediately would cause chaos beyond measure. Dragons suddenly, freed from genetic constraints that had defined them for millennia, might destroy themselves and others in their confusion. So you made it dormant, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. We made it triggered by specific environmental conditions that would indicate the species was ready for change, Veltereth confirmed. Conditions that would suggest dragons had encountered other sentient species who could serve as examples of free thought and cooperation. Thyranar's massive form shuddered. The ruins where my son was infected. They were testing facilities. They were preparation chambers. The hologram corrected gently. Places where the liberation protocol could be safely activated when the time was right. Your son's exposure was not an accident of proximity. It was the result of genetic recognition protocols that identified him as a suitable candidate for the change. Marcus stared at the data flowing across the displays. Zeth Kaler isn't dying from a weapon. He's undergoing a genetic transformation that his body isn't equipped to handle. Precisely, Veltereth said. The process was designed to be gradual and supported by specific treatments that we developed. Without those treatments, the transformation becomes traumatic and potentially fatal. The hologram gestured toward a sealed chamber at the rear of the room. The treatment protocols and necessary compounds are stored there. But be warned, using them will complete the transformation. The young dragon will survive, but he will be fundamentally changed. He will be free of the genetic constraints that have defined his bloodline for 10,000 years. Thiranar moved toward the chamber without hesitation. Then, he'll be free to choose his own path, to think his own thoughts, to be who he truly is rather than what genetics and tradition demand. As she opened the sealed chamber, Marcus realized the magnitude of what they had discovered. This wasn't just about saving one young dragon's life. It was about the possibility of freeing an entire species from genetic programming that had shaped their civilization for millennia. The chamber contained vials of complex compounds, detailed treatment protocols, and something else that made Marcus's breath catch: genetic templates that showed what dragons could become if freed from their artificial constraints. The projected models showed beings of incredible potential, capable of empathy and cooperation that the current empire couldn't even conceive of. Dr. Chen, Thar said as she gathered the necessary materials. If my son undergoes this transformation, he will be unlike any dragon in the current empire. He may be seen as a threat, a mutation to be eliminated. Marcus looked at the holographic Veltereth, who seemed to be waiting for a question. Will other dragons be able to undergo this transformation? The process is most effective during youth, but it can be adapted for adults, the hologram replied. However, the choice must be made freely. Forced transformation would be as great a tyranny as the constraints we sought to break. As they prepared to return to their ship with the precious cargo, Marcus realized that they were carrying more than just medical supplies. They were carrying the seeds of a revolution that could transform not just dragon society, but the entire galactic order. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for the changes that young Zethkaler's transformation might herald, and whether they could protect him long enough for those changes to take root. The ancient facility hummed around them as they departed, its secrets partially revealed, but its full implications still to be understood. Behind them, the hologram of Veltereth continued its eternal vigil, waiting for other seekers who might one day finish the work that had begun 10,000 years ago. The Forbidden Zones had yielded their treasure, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had the cure for Zethkaler's condition, but using it would open doors that could never be closed again. The journey back to Kepler Station was tense with anticipation and fear. In the medical bay, young Zethkaler's condition had deteriorated further during their absence. His breathing was shallow, and his life signs fluctuated wildly as the genetic transformation continued to tear through his small body without the proper supporting treatments. Marcus worked frantically to adapt the ancient protocols to modern medical equipment, while Thiranar maintained a constant vigil beside her son. The treatment compounds from his sanctum were incredibly complex, requiring precise molecular modifications to be compatible with current medical technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived on the station 12 hours after their return, having traveled from Proxima at maximum speed with a team of the finest genetic specialists in human space. Marcus had been cryptic in his emergency transmission, but Elena understood that something unprecedented was happening. Marcus, what exactly have you discovered? Elena asked as she reviewed the preliminary data he had prepared. These genetic sequences, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if someone has been systematically rewriting the fundamental structure of dragon DNA. Marcus looked around the laboratory at the assembled team of human scientists, then at Thiranar, who had somehow managed to position herself where she could observe their work. This was the moment of truth, when the secret would either save Zethkaler or destroy everything they had worked for. Elena, what I'm about to tell you will change everything we thought we knew about dragon civilization. Marcus began. The dragons have been genetically constrained for 10,000 years, programmed at the cellular level to maintain specific thought patterns and social structures. What's happening to Zethkaler isn't a disease. It's a liberation protocol created by ancient dragon scientists to free their people from genetic programming. The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Vasquez stared at the genetic data with new understanding, her brilliant mind immediately grasping the magnitude of what Marcus was describing. You're saying the dragon's sense of superiority, their rigid social hierarchy, their belief in their right to rule, all of that is artificial, she asked quietly. Thyra spoke for the first time since the human team had arrived. Dr. Vasquez, I've spent the last several days learning truths about my own people that I was genetically incapable of understanding before. The constraints in our bloodlines don't just influence our thoughts. They define the very boundaries of what we can think. Elena approached the massive dragon with a mixture of scientific fascination and professional respect. And you're willing to allow us to remove these constraints from your son, even though we don't fully understand the consequences? The consequences of not acting are certain, Thyra replied. My son will die. The consequences of acting are unknown, but they offer hope. As a mother and as a sentient being, the choice is clear. Over the next 18 hours, the combined human and dragon knowledge worked to create a treatment protocol that would save Zethkaler's life while enabling his genetic transformation. The process was incredibly complex, requiring a careful balance of the ancient compounds with modern life support technology. During the preparation phase, something unexpected happened. Dr. Vasquez made a discovery that stopped everyone in their tracks. Marcus, look at this, she called, her voice filled with amazement. The genetic modifications in the dragon royal bloodlines, they're not just constraints. They're also enhancements. The programming includes boosted cognitive functions, extended lifespans, and enhanced physical capabilities. Marcus studied the data she had highlighted. You're saying the genetic programming made dragons more than they would have been naturally? Exactly. But at the cost of their freedom to choose their own thoughts and values, Elena confirmed. The ancient scientist who created the Liberation Protocol found a way to remove the constraints while preserving the beneficial modifications. Thyra listened to this exchange with growing wonder. Are you saying that my son will not only be free to think as he chooses, but will also retain the enhanced abilities of our bloodline? If the ancient protocols work as designed, yes, Marcus replied. But there's something else. The genetic templates we found suggest that free dragons would also gain new capabilities, enhanced empathy, increased ability to form emotional bonds across species barriers, and expanded cognitive flexibility. As they began the treatment process, Marcus realized they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Zethkaler would be the first dragon in 10,000 years to be truly free, but he would also be the first to bridge the gap between dragon and human understanding. The treatment itself took 12 hours. Zethkaler remained unconscious throughout the process, while his cellular structure was carefully modified according to the ancient protocols. Marcus and his team monitored every vital sign, every genetic marker, watching as 10 millennia of programming was systematically undone. The critical moment came when Zethkaler's life signs suddenly spiked, his small body convulsing as the final genetic locks were broken. For 30 seconds, every monitor screamed warnings as his neural activity went off the charts. Then, suddenly, everything stabilized. Zethkaler's breathing became deep and regular, his life signs normalized, and his cellular regeneration began operating at rates that astounded the human medical team. It's working, Marcus whispered, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. Thyra leaned closer to her son, her massive eyes reflecting hope and fear in equal measure. How will we know if the transformation is complete? As if in answer to her question, Zethkaler's eyes fluttered open. But instead of the typical silver gold of dragon eyes, his were a brilliant green-blue that seemed to shift and change as he looked around the medical bay. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong, but there was something different about it, a quality that neither Marcus nor Thyra had heard in any dragon before. Mother, he said, the word carrying emotions that seemed to go beyond normal dragon familial bonds. I feel different, like I've been sleeping and just woke up, like I can see colors that weren't there before. Thyra response was immediate and overwhelming. Tears flowed from her ancient eyes as she gently touched her son with one massive claw. My precious child, you are safe. You are alive. And you are free. Over the following days, as Zethkaler recovered his strength, the changes in him became more apparent. He showed curiosity about the humans caring for him that went far beyond typical dragon interest in other species. He asked questions about human culture, emotion, and society that demonstrated a capacity for understanding that was unprecedented in dragon history. But the most remarkable change was in his relationship with his mother. The genetic constraints that had limited dragon emotional expression for millennia were gone, and the bond between Tharanar and Zethkalar deepened into something that transcended species boundaries. Dr. Chun, Zethkalar said during one of their conversations, I can feel something that I don't think other dragons can feel. When I look at you, at the humans who saved my life, I feel gratitude, but it's more than that. I feel connection, like your family, even though we're different species. Marcus felt tears in his own eyes as he understood what the young dragon was describing. That's called empathy, Zethkalar. It's the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The ancient scientists who created the Liberation Protocol believed that empathy was the key to true civilization, Tharanar added. They thought that beings who could truly understand each other could build a galaxy based on cooperation rather than domination. As word of Zethkalar's recovery spread through the station, something else began to happen. Crew members who had never paid attention to dragon affairs found themselves drawn to the young being who bridged the gap between their species. Scientists, engineers, and support staff all found excuses to visit the medical bay, and each came away changed by their interactions with a dragon who could truly connect with them as equals. But their sanctuary couldn't last forever. On the 5th day after Zethkalar's transformation, long-range sensors detected a fleet of dragon warships approaching Kepler Station. The Draconian Empire had discovered Tharanar's location and was coming to retrieve their wayward noble. Commander Walsh called an emergency meeting with Marcus and Tharanar. The fleet is still 6 hours away, but they're broadcasting demands for your immediate surrender. They're classifying you as a rogue element and your son as a contaminated biological hazard. Tharanar straightened to her full, imposing height. They will not take my son. I will die before I allow them to harm him or undo what has been accomplished here. There's another option, Marcus said quietly. Asylum. If you formally request political asylum with the Human Federation, we can provide protection under galactic law. And start an interstellar war, Commander Walsh added grimly. The dragons won't accept one of their nobles defecting to humanity. Zethkalar, who had been listening to the conversation with his newfound understanding, spoke up with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his young years. Perhaps we don't have to choose between war and surrender. Perhaps it's time to show the galaxy what cooperation between species really means. As the dragon fleet approached, carrying with it the weight of 10,000 years of tradition and the fury of an empire that brooked no challenges to its authority, the small group on Kepler Station prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just their own fates, but the future relationship between humans and dragons. The transformation was complete, but the real test was about to begin. Would the galaxy accept the existence of a free dragon, or would the ancient patterns of domination and submission prove too strong to break? The answer lay in the approaching darkness of space, where the old order sailed toward its appointment with change incarnate. The dragon fleet that emerged from hyperspace around Kepler Station was a sight that spoke of absolute imperial power. 12 massive warships arranged themselves in a perfect formation, their ancient hulls gleaming with the authority of 10,000 years of unquestioned dominance. At the center of the formation was the flagship Eternal Dominion, a vessel so large it could have housed entire human cities within its corridors. The communication that followed was formal, cold, and utterly uncompromising. Admiral Korthak Zen, voice of the Dragon High Command, delivered his ultimatum with the certainty of one who had never been refused. Human Station, you harbor a rogue element of the Draconian Empire. Noble Tharanar of the Crimson Wing clan has violated imperial law and contaminated herself and her offspring with forbidden knowledge. You will surrender them immediately or face the consequences of harboring enemies of the Dragon State. Commander Walsh stood in the station's command center, surrounded by her senior staff and very aware that the 12 warships outside could reduce Kepler Station to atomic particles within minutes. But she also stood beside Dr. Marcus Chun, whose presence reminded her of something more important than military might. Admiral Korthak Zen, she replied formally, Tharadar and her son Zethkaler have requested political asylum under galactic law. They are under the protection of the Human Federation as of this moment. The response from the flagship was immediate and filled with barely controlled fury. Humans do not dictate law to dragons, Commander. You have 30 minutes to comply, or we will board your station and take what is ours by right. In the medical bay, Tharadar listened to the exchange with a mixture of grief and determination. Beside her, Zethkaler's transformed senses allowed him to feel the fear and tension radiating from every human on the station. But he also felt something else, their resolve to protect him and his mother despite the overwhelming odds. "Mother," Zethkaler said quietly, "I want to speak to the Admiral." Tharadar looked at her son with alarm. "My child, you cannot. They will see your transformation as a disease to be cured or an abomination to be destroyed." "Maybe," Zethkaler replied with the wisdom that came from his new freedom to think beyond traditional constraints. "But maybe they'll see something they've never seen before, a dragon who can truly understand them." Marcus, who had been listening to their conversation, felt a sudden surge of inspiration. What if we don't try to hide what's happened? What if we show them exactly what Zethkaler has become? "Dr. Chun," Commander Walsh's voice came over the intercom. "The Dragon Admiral is demanding to speak with you specifically. He says you're responsible for corrupting noble bloodlines." Marcus looked at Tharadar and Zethkaler, understanding that this moment would define everything that followed. "Patch me through to the flagship." Full visual communication. When Admiral Korthak Zen appeared on the main screen, Marcus was struck by the being's imposing presence. This was a dragon of the old school, massive, proud, and absolutely certain of his superiority over all other forms of life. His silver scales seemed to radiate contempt as he focused his ancient gaze on the human before him. "You are the one responsible for this contamination," Admiral Korthak Zen stated rather than asked. "You have corrupted a noble bloodline with your primitive meddling." "I saved a child's life," Marcus replied simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." The Admiral's massive head tilted slightly, his expression suggesting he was looking at something beneath his notice. "The offspring was dying as nature intended. Some genetic lines are meant to end. Your interference has created an abomination that threatens the natural order." Before Marcus could respond, Zethkaler stepped into view of the communication screen. The effect on Admiral Korthak Zen was immediate and dramatic. The ancient dragon's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the young being before him. Clearly dragon, but transformed in ways that defied everything he understood about his species. "Greetings, Admiral Korthak Zen," Zethkaler said, his voice carrying a calm authority that seemed impossible for one so young. "I am Zethkaler of the Crimson Wing clan, son of Tharadar. I understand you have concerns about my condition." Admiral Korthak Zen stared at the young dragon for a long moment, his ancient mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Zethkaler's eyes held an intelligence and empathy that no dragon in the Admiral's experience had ever possessed. More disturbing still, the youngling seemed completely unaffected by the natural deference that all dragons showed to their military superiors. "You speak without proper respect," the Admiral said finally, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "You show no recognition of hierarchy or proper station." "I show you the respect due to any sentient being," Zethkaler replied. "But I will not bow simply because tradition demands it. I have seen what lies beyond the constraints of our bloodlines, Admiral. I have felt what it means to truly connect with other beings, to understand them not as subordinates or superiors, but as equals." The words hit Admiral Korthak Zen like physical blows. In 10,000 years of dragon history, no youngling had ever spoken such thoughts. The very concepts Zethkaler was expressing should have been impossible for a dragon to conceive. "This is precisely what we feared," the Admiral said, though his voice now carried a note of uncertainty. "You have been transformed into something that is no longer truly dragon." "Have I?" Zethkaler asked. "Or have I become what dragons were always meant to be before our ancestors decided that freedom was too dangerous to allow?" Behind Admiral Korthak Zen, other dragons on the flagship's bridge were listening to the conversation with growing amazement. Some looked disturbed, but others showed signs of fascination. Marcus realized that Zethkaler's words were reaching beyond the Admiral to touch minds that had never heard such ideas before. Tharadar stepped forward to join her son. "Admiral, I served the Empire faithfully for 300 years. I have commanded fleets and conquered worlds in the name of dragon supremacy. But I have learned that there is something greater than supremacy. There is understanding. Noble Thor, the Admiral said, his formal training struggling against the unprecedented situation. You speak of treason. You advocate the destruction of everything our civilization stands for. I advocate evolution, Thyranear replied. I advocate growth. I advocate the possibility that we might build something greater than an empire based on domination, a confederation based on cooperation. Dr. Vasquez, who had remained quietly in the background, suddenly stepped forward. Admiral, may I show you something? Before anyone could object, she activated a holographic display that showed the genetic analysis of Zeth Kaler's transformation. The complex data streams painted a picture of biological enhancement rather than degradation. Your young dragon hasn't been weakened by his transformation, she explained. He's been enhanced. His cognitive abilities are superior to baseline dragon norms. His physical capabilities are unchanged. But he's gained something no dragon has possessed for 10,000 years. The ability to form genuine emotional connections across species barriers. Admiral Korthak Zen studied the data with the analytical mind that had made him one of the Empire's greatest military strategists. What he saw challenged every assumption about genetic purity and species superiority that formed the foundation of dragon civilization. These enhancements, he said slowly, where did they come from? Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything. They came from your own ancestors, Admiral. From dragon scientists who understood that true strength comes not from genetic constraints, but from the freedom to grow beyond predetermined limits. He activated another display, this one showing excerpts from the ancient recordings they had discovered in the sanctum. Veltaritha's holographic image appeared, speaking of liberation and the artificial constraints that had shaped dragon society for millennia. The effect on the Dragon Bridge crew was electric. Officers who had served the Empire for centuries found themselves hearing truths that their own programming had made impossible to consider. Some showed signs of distress, but others displayed a growing fascination with concepts they were encountering for the first time. One of the younger officers on the flagship stepped forward. Admiral, if this information is accurate, it suggests that our entire understanding of dragon history may be incomplete. Admiral Korthak Zen turned to stare at his subordinate, shocked not just by the words, but by the fact that the younger dragon was capable of thinking such thoughts. Commander Velthara, you will return to your station and speak no more of this matter. But Commander Velthara didn't move. For the first time in his life, he was thinking thoughts that the genetic programming in his bloodlines should have prevented. Admiral, with respect, I find myself unable to simply dismiss this information. Something about this young dragon's words resonates in ways I cannot explain. Marcus realized what was happening. Zeth Kaler's presence, his demonstration of what a free dragon could become, was somehow affecting the other dragons, even through the communication link. The transformation wasn't just individual. It was contagious in the most wonderful way possible. Admiral Korthak Zen, veteran of countless battles and unquestioned authority figure for centuries, found himself in a situation no dragon commander had ever faced. His crew was thinking independently, questioning fundamental assumptions, and demonstrating cognitive flexibility that should have been impossible. Admiral, Zeth Kaler said gently, you have a choice to make. You could try to destroy what I represent, but you cannot destroy the idea itself. Too many minds have been touched by it now. Or you can choose to learn, to grow, to become part of something greater than domination. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent as the most powerful military commander in the Dragon Fleet found himself facing a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Around him, his officers waited with a tension that came not from fear of battle, but from the possibility of change. Admiral Korthak Zen looked at Zeth Kaler for a long moment, then at Thorodar, then at the human scientists who had made this transformation possible. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of 10,000 years of history ending and a new age beginning. Young dragon, he said slowly, you speak of things that challenge everything I have ever known. But I am a student of strategy, and I recognize when the fundamental conditions of conflict have changed. Perhaps it is time for this old warrior to learn new ways of thinking. He turned to his crew, seeing them with new eyes. Commander Velthara, prepare a diplomatic communication to the Dragon High Command. Tell them that the situation here requires careful consideration. Then, he looked back at the screen, addressing Marcus directly. Dr. Chun, I formally request permission to dock with your station. Not as a conqueror, but as someone seeking to understand what you have accomplished here. Marcus felt tears in his eyes as he realized what had just happened. A dragon admiral, representative of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, had just acknowledged humanity as equals and requested permission to learn from them. Permission granted, Admiral, Marcus replied. Welcome to the beginning of a new age. As the massive flagship moved toward Kepler Station's docking facilities, Marcus understood that they had achieved something far greater than saving one young dragon's life. They had planted the seeds of a transformation that would eventually spread throughout the galaxy, touching every species and every world. Thyron R's tears of desperation had become tears of joy, and her act of maternal love had become the catalyst for the greatest change in galactic history. The universe was about to learn that the most powerful force in creation wasn't military might or technological superiority. It was the simple courage to reach across the void between species and say, we are all family. The new dawn had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again.